So there are a couple people on the functional team that I want to introduce before we start showing you our baby pictures. One is Andrea Zirman, who is the functional lead for the project team. And let's see, who else is here from the project team? Matt Saving. Matt is our planning administrator. Alfred, where's Alfred? Alfred Alipio Jackson. Thank you. What? Tiffany, where did she go? Tiffany Ma, people. Yeah, so we've interspersed them in the audience, and
they were my plants.
They're plants, but one of the things we want to do is make sure that we get a lot of questions. We capture people's interests and questions. We can continue to have more discussion with the team. I also want to introduce Eileen Foster. Eileen she came to us from Santa Cruz, and she has been here
2 years.
2 years, yeah, working through both Phase 2 and Phase 3, and her background with PPS at Santa Cruz has been really helpful to us in terms of guiding and directing and understanding the data. Also, Alfred worked for many years in HR analytics. So Eileen has trained for us. She has been a user support person. She, really worked very actively on that compensation design team that I mentioned, where we had like a core group of folks that worked with us on the design of the application. So, with no further ado, Miss Eileen Foster.
Come on. Hi, everyone. So welcome back from lunch, and thank you for the introduction, Cathy. I wanted to take a moment before we get started looking at the application demo to kind of just get a census of where you are with Hyperion planning. I know some people that have came to the conference are either interested in it, they're already implementing it, or maybe you've never seen it before. And so do you have it implemented, or are you in the process of an implementation? Maybe a show of hands. Linda? Yeah, both things. Have you heard of it or before? Have you never heard of it, and this is your first introduction to it? Okay, so we have at least a little common ground to start from. I'm going to be using some terminology. We've been talking about chart of accounts, and along the way, one of the things we've been faced with, even in our implementation, is ensuring our language is aligned. So I wanted to make sure if I'm talking about something regarding Hyperion, that it makes sense to you in terminology. So the first part is our planning solution on the campus. So we had a phased implementation, as Cathy mentioned. We went live in our first phase with financial reporting. And with financial reporting, we're using, we went live with 11.1.2.1. We've since upgraded to 11.1.2.3, or 11.1.2.2.3. Is that what patch we're on? We have planning and public sector planning and budgeting now live as well. So planning, I'll talk through what those two things are, and public sector budgeting and planning as well. We also have Smart View that our users are using, and I'm going to show you a scratch on the surface of the functionality that those all offer today. After I show it to you, my expectation is you're going to want to see a lot more, and come talk to us. Mehmet or Alfred or myself or Andy, come talk to us a little bit more, and we can show you more detail about the system itself. I will say with this suite of tools, like Andy mentioned, I came from UC Santa Cruz, and I knew PPS. I knew our enterprise financial systems there. I did not know Hyperion. I had to Google what the term S-Base was before I got started here. So another question you might have is, if you're not quite familiar with it and you're thinking about implementing it, what trainings can you take to help you get on board with what this tool offers? And I'd be happy to help you talk through that. Or, as I did, just rely really heavily on Hyperion geniuses or gurus like Mike Kember or Tina Chimchak, who are our consulting partners from M2 Dynamics. So our backend platform is Windows, and our existing ERP footprint, which is on our campus, was PeopleSoft Financials, version 9.0. And then we have PeopleSoft HRMS, so our HCM, Human Capital Management System. We have Workforce Admin. We have Position. And then we also have a custom data warehouse using Hyperion Intelligence. We have a lot more coming on in the way of software, but this, having PeopleSoft has set us up, and having Position has set us up for a lot of success in implementing our planning applications. So when we look at the data flow, this is a very user-friendly data flow picture. If you want to see what the real infrastructure matrix looks like, I'd be happy to show you. The way it works right now is we have our financial system for the campus, PeopleSoft Financials, filtering into our enterprise data warehouse. Then we have our Cal Planning solution in the center. Cal Planning takes monthly snapshots of actuals from our enterprise data warehouse, puts them into our financial reporting tool. We call it Cal Reporting. That's the name of our plan type. And then our data entry for planning, we call it Cal Plan. Then we went live with, just recently, we're just getting over the shock of going live and delivering our budgets using employee and position budgeting. That application is called Human Capital Planning, and the out-of-the-box module from Hyperion is Public Sector Planning and PSPB, Public Sector Planning and Budgeting. And I will talk at the end of our demonstration about our choice around choosing public sector, as well as some of the things that we had to adjust and align to get it to work for us here on this campus. So we have our HR system. When we went live with HCP, we took a snapshot of HR data. That included employee and position data. And a lot of people thought we were going to be doing regular feeds, but there's a little bit of, I won't say a little bit, there's a lot of massaging that had to go in to getting the data to align correctly between the two systems. And going back to a question that we had earlier about, as you're working in these systems and improving your data, are you changing the way that you're working on campus? And taking data from HCM and putting it into a financial system has definitely brought our campus between financial and HR so much closer together. I just was in a focus group yesterday with our users, and they were saying, you know, I'm not an HR person, but when I went in there, I started thinking, well, why is it like this? And they started identifying questions about, you know, thinking strategically about their HR data because they could see it in a financial planning tool. So we took a snapshot instead of, and we're going to do another one in the fall. There's a balance when you start thinking about planning for your employee and position budgeting, about the work that your users are going to do for planning. They have to go in and update employee information, and then getting a regular feed of employee and position data. So where do you walk the line between allowing them to plan and getting good data out of your source system without overwriting all the work that they've done? So we're still trying to figure that out. We have focus groups underway to see how to best work that coming in the fall. But for now, when we went live, we took just one snapshot to start. Also, HCP is built to feed back, but we're not feeding back at this time. We're just using it as a planning tool. And like Laurent said, and we'll say over and over, it's just a plan. So when people change things in our system, they're just changing their plan. They're not authorizing. At this point, it's just their plan. So when we start thinking more about the system in our planning tool, users go into HCP and they can enter and update their employee and position budgeting. On an hourly basis, we take that very summarized employee level, position level detailed budget, we drop the employee and position, and we just bring in the chart string summarized data into our planning tool. That way, when you're planning for your non-compensation, your revenue, your transfers, you can also see your compensation budget that you've planned for by employee and position in one report, and I'll show you what that looks like. We also, in that same hourly push, feed from our planning tool into our reporting tool, and I'll talk a little bit why we separate them out as well. And then the other thing we do in that hourly push is take data from our employee and position cube, and we put it into there's different terminology, block storage versus an ASO. We put it into an area where you can report a bit more robustly from it. I will say with the employee and position budgeting, one of the gotchas that we've been encountering as we're working with other campuses is people are having trouble reporting off of the number of intersections that are available for all your employee and position data. So we're working through that. We're creating reports that are looking really nice. And so we're going to continue to develop the reports around employee and position budgets. With that, continuing to develop the reports, the other thing that's coming, we haven't done quite yet, is getting actuals into our employee and position budgeting reporting tool so that you can take a look at, I planned for this person to receive a certain amount of money in a fiscal year, and what actually occurred to that employee and position. There's some intricacies with working with HCM and PPS, and so right now we went live with position employee budgeting, and we'll focus on getting actuals in coming forward on a later date. So any questions just about this data flow? If we look a little closer at the data we got from our human capital management system, right, as I was saying, we took a snapshot of data. We took actual data from HCM and mapped it into human capital planning, where users are able to update their employee and position plan. We took employee data, position data. We even brought in vacant positions. That way you can plan for potential vacancies or filling vacancies within the next year. We brought in something called a multiple headcount position. Multiple headcount positions are where maybe you have one type of job on the campus. Let's say you have a facilities position with multiple employees that are reporting into that position. So we have single employee positions, multiple employee positions, and then this other type of position that we're planning for that actually we didn't bring in any data for, and it's a concept of pooled. Pooled positions allow us to plan by headcount and FTE only. So that's the type of position. I think student workers are a great example on a campus area where you don't really know the employees coming and going. From a budgeting perspective, they might not have enough significance in your plan to know their name. But their dollar value can be significant enough to your budget that rather than planning for someone to be here 10 hours a week for 3 weeks, you just want to plan a pot for this particular job. So that's where we develop pooled positions. We also brought in, we brought in reg type salary, but then we decided not to bring in additional pay. And the idea around not bringing in additional pay, such as stipends, shift differentials, all the different variants away from regular type pay, was again this balance of how do you strategically budget without having to do a bunch of data entry? You know, do you want your financial analysts going in and updating every single end date on a stipend? Or would you rather than spend their time strategically thinking about the budget and how how a cost is going to impact or affect their overall outcome? So that was one of the decisions our compensation design focus group made was, don't bring that in, I'll plan for it in a bucket, which brings in the other concept that we have. We call them depth ID adjustments, but really we did this mixed planning style where users can plan in this tool for single employees, multiple employees, pooled positions that have no employer position, and then they can also make compensation adjustments. They can plan pots of money as well. So a very mixed planning style. So something to consider when you're looking at designing your application, and something that hit us and was a big reason that we started looking to outreach and developing some strategies around how to handle our hierarchies is dimensional design. A dimension in Hyperion is really just it's just a way to define your data. So an account is a dimension, a fund is a dimension. It's their term for the categorizations of your data. Hyperion is a multi-dimensional database. So when you want to find data, it looks at the intersection of every single dimension to find the number, which is a little different from relational databases. So up here I have an example of all the possible members. Members are any item within a dimension. So let's say, for example, this is a generic numbers, not specifically Cal's numbers. But let's say, for example, these are the number of members that make up your dimensions. And because of the way a cube works, because of the way S-Space works, if you wanted to do a calculation on a database that had 25,000 funds, 25,000 project codes, 4,500 entities, you would be doing it on 3.76 to whatever numbers. Imagine the length of time it would take to do that. Imagine your users sitting there tapping their watches while waiting for your calculations to run in the background. So it's not very efficient. So we had to consider that when we were looking at designing our dimensions. We talked a lot today about the strategic organization of our entity structure. There was work done on our chart field 1 hierarchy, which it continues to happen. Kirk is nodding. Kirk did all that. So we had to ask ourselves the question first, what dimensions and members are essential for planning? You know, when you think of planning, how far do you want to plan your budget when you're thinking of a chart string or your chart of accounts, whatever word it is, your full accounting unit, your FOPL, whatever word you align with, how far do you want to plan your budget? Do you want to create a budget to every single potential intersection that's available within your chart of accounts? So we did some analysis and decided that of our available dimensions, we were not going to include our program codes or our chart field 2, which is a flex code for planning purposes. You don't have to create your budget out to that length of detail. We did include it in our reporting cube, though. That way, when you're looking at your budget, you can take it and compare it to what actually occurred. You can get a more granular level of detail in reporting. And then we did a big analysis on funds. 25,000 funds is a number that comes across us quite often. We analyzed that and we brought the funds available for planning closer to 200. And that's a scary thing on a campus when you're thinking about planning and everyone's very used to their funds. So the way we first started with that analysis is we looked at people's current activity and we said, we'll include your funds if they represent 5% of your budget. That seems like, that seems like not too much spending, but you'd be surprised within these funds how much we were able to slough away for planning purposes by not including something that wasn't that material. So we go from 25,000 to 200 funds. What we did then is we created plan members. These members are really I wouldn't say a substitute, but more of a summarization of multiple funds. So rather than planning to 19,900, 19,933, all your different unrestricted funds, you could plan to something called unrestricted plan. So you can look at your unrestricted funds in a more general categorization, and that kind of aligns with the thought of an all funds approach to your budgeting. We also did that with our account structure and our chart field 1 structure, providing these plan member values. And there is a task on the user's end to learn that. And I will say, if you decide to go that route, the more tools you can provide them in learning how you're mapping the data, the better it will be to assimilate that and build their plan strategically. So from our end, we have to actually use mapping tools to then map data to those plan-only members. We look at, say for example, we have one account that's a plan-only member, and then there's 6 accounts that report to that. We map data then so that you can report and look at your plan-only account next to a plan-only actual version. We also reviewed hierarchies to allow for strategic planning. Our accounts were reviewed so that we could do dynamic calculations. All those reports you saw today earlier where you're seeing net operating surplus deficit or revenues and expenses, those are not hard-coded into a report. They're calculations that the hierarchy has built in. We flipped signs so that you could do math. So revenues minus expenses equal a net operating surplus deficit, and I'll show you what that looks like in the system. You don't have to do the math hard-coded into a report. The hierarchy allows that to happen for you if you spend some time working on it. It definitely took us some time to get there in the beginning. We also looked at trying to, again, streamline our dimensions. We combined business unit and entity. So and this is something that's going to be, I think, very personal to you if you're thinking about your dimensional design. When we were at the HUG conference, I heard a lot of really great innovations around dimensional design, how people thought of their data. And this is something that we did. It might not work for you, but we have, for our business units, from a planning purpose, we have our campus and then also UCOP that was important to report on. And so rather than having two separate dimensions for that, we just combine them. So when you see our entity hierarchy, you'll see it prefaced 1 underscore and an entity, J underscore and then an entity. And again, that's to allow for less intersections of your data. And as we've mentioned, major campus-wide reviews of our hierarchies. With regards to the One Hierarchy project, because of all the work that they did, we were actually able to utilize the One Hierarchy in our last budget cycle. So our users were planning for the FY14 operating budget, and we were utilizing the one entity hierarchy before it's even going live. It goes live in our data where our PeopleSoft financials. It goes live, and we call it Berkeley Financial System, BFS, at the beginning of this fiscal year, but they were able to plan on it in advance. So we'll be all synced up going forward from here on out. So when we think of our dimensions, one of the dimensions that we utilize quite a lot is versions and scenarios. Versions are versions of a particular type of scenario. So a scenario might be your actuals, your operating budget, your forecast. And then you can have multiple versions of that. You can have a final version. We have working versions. We have planner submission versions. And one of the things to think of, I would say, if possible in advance, is what versions are you going to create to support your budget process? When we first started, we kind of created them on the fly. All right, we need to take a snapshot. Do it now. And now this time around, we have this beautiful matrix, and we're thinking about long-term data planning, and that's been a real helpful tool. Not only do our planners know, when I pull this, what does it mean, but it also helps us to plan for how we're going to store the data coming forward in the future. So from a planning process, we have all these different tools, but from a user perspective, I'm going to show you it's very integrated. My security determines what I can see and access when I log into this one workspace. You can access Hyperion via the web. You can also access it using an Excel or Microsoft Office add-in. SmartView is the Excel add-in. From our planner's perspective, they go into human capital planning, create a budget for their employee imposition. We take that data, like I said, we drop the employee imposition, and we just bring in this data here, which is a distribution account entity. This is their chart string. That then flows into our planning tool, CalPlan, where they're planning their other types of accounts, their revenue, their non-compensation expense. They're planning for transfers. And in a report, they can see a summarized version of their compensation expense as well. Then finally, that's all flows into our reporting tool, which allows for, you'll see here, I have this one account called fee remission plan, and then a forecast for that fee remission plan. Well, that's one of those plan-only members I mentioned. And in our reporting tool, I can compare all the actuals that happen to every individual account with my plan member. So that's how it kind of links all together. I'm going to show you it all now in a demo. I'm going to come over here. Any questions while I'm switching gear? Okay. Okay. So what I have on my desktop, I'm logging into Internet Explorer 9, and this is our launch point for logging into the Cal Planning workspace. I'm going to log into our test workspace with a test ID, so there's no issue of me overwriting any data here today. With it being our test environment and being on wireless, I might be a little bit slower, but you know, that's the panic of a live demo. So everything's going to be all right, Eileen. Okay, so when I log in, here, this is what the workspace looks like for a user. And again, like I said, what I can access here is all based upon my security. In this case, this user has access to all of our applications. And so up here in the workspace, we've set this to open to a home page. And in their home page, they'll see their recently opened items. You can see I was busy opening some reports, as well as they have the option to set favorites. If there's favorite reports that the user likes, they might set their favorites. And then any applications that they're going to log into, they just click right from here. So if I didn't have access to this, I wouldn't see that CalPlan link. So I'm just going to click there, and we'll get started doing a little planning. My login, remember, I'm on version 11.1.2.2. If you have seen demos of the previous version, this is going to look just a little bit different. There's been some really great advancements in the new version. One of them includes the removal of something called View Basic Mode. Users had to choose whether they were viewing in basic mode versus advanced mode. And this is a huge win for us. Our users that had to do that in the last phase of our project love this new advancement. So when I log in, I come to my task list homepage. And again, the only thing that I can see here is what I have access to. On the left-hand side of the screen here, this is a left-hand navigation pane, and then on the right-hand side of the screen is a task list homepage. So all the task lists that I have access to will reside in this left-hand navigation pane. Well, a task list is one of the great features of the online, or of the planning tool itself, I should say. And one of the things we spent a lot of time working with our users as well as our business partners, the budget office, to develop. A task list contains links to reports, forms, web pages, whatever you need, and includes instructions, whatever you need to create the right sequential step for your business process. So when I click on these task lists, they might look very different from ones that you have or you've seen because they're really developed to support Berkeley's budgeting process. The first one is the HCP Planner task list. In this task list, you'll see we have links to reference tools. We've linked outside of our website, actually, to say, if you have questions, you don't have to go Google it. Just click on this link, and it'll take you to where you'll find the answers. The other thing it links to are the other forms. Remember I said we have a mixed position planning model within Cal Planning. So I can manage existing employees and positions. I can create and manage vacant positions. I can create and manage my pooled positions. And then I can do depth ID adjustments. And then the last step we added was a review process to run reports to look at it and see those updates that I did, how do they look in a report form. So if I take a look at my manage existing employees and positions, I can actually size this window a little bit to give a little bit more real estate. This is an innovation that we did with public sector planning and budgeting. Out of the box, you'll see that you have the ability to plan for employees and positions separate from one another. That's how the forms are set up. And when we were working with our users and looking at the user interface, we thought this was a way to streamline the process. Rather than planning your employees and your positions separately, this provided them an opportunity to plan them all from one launch space. So if I right-click on an employee, if I'm on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see my cursor does this little right-handed arrow thing. This tells me that I can do some right-click navigation. So HCP, or Human Capital Planning, is all right-click navigation based. If I right-click on Susan, I have the option to manage my employee and I can review, change, separate. I could delete an employee that I've created, but not one that came in from HCM. And then I can also calculate their compensation. For the position, I could review the position details or terminate the position if the position's no longer active. So for this employee, let's start by, I'm going to change their salary. This is probably something that might be a common action that a planner would do. So we tried to make our messages as user-friendly and Berkeley-specific as possible. When you see them out of the box, they refer back to the business rules, which are the calculations in the system. But we spent a lot of time at trying to make them a bit more user-friendly. And actually in our user focus groups that we're having right now that people have gone through a business cycle, using this tool, we're going to enhance this feature even more. So it tells you, just make sure, do you really want to do this? And I say, okay. From this screen, I'm given the option, what's the effective date of this salary change? Well, I will make her salary change. I'm in my fiscal year 14 operating budget is what I'm working in. So I'm going to make this salary adjustment effective 12/1 of 2013. And I have the option to change the salary by either adding, subtracting, multiplying, setting the rate. So I'm going to set the salary here. I'm going to say the new salary is going to be $50,000. And we'll click launch. One of the other innovations that we did was on launch, this is now running multiple business rules. So when rather than having our users click save and then going and clicking a business, hello. Hello. So rather than our users going and clicking a save and then a business rule, they're actually going to be able to do it both right from here.
So
this is going to
make myself
Mariano will take care of it for us. Well, it's all right. This is taking a second anyway inside of our test environment. So as you're taking your seats, I'll just go ahead and let you know where we left off. So I was updating Susan's compensation. I ran a business rule, and then I got a message that said, hey, Eileen, it happened successfully. So I say, okay. I will right-click on Susan, but before I do that, I realized I didn't point out to you, at the top of this page are my preferences. I am currently only viewing data for a specific department, and I've selected the department. And my preferences are going to carry forward whether I'm in human capital planning or CalPlan. So HCP and CalPlan, my preferences are set. I can change them directly from this screen, or back on my navigation pane, I can go down and change my preferences right from this area as well. So I'm working in my FY14 operating budget working version, which is what our users were working in and submitted to Laurent and Erin during their budget hearings. So for Susan, if I right-click on Susan, maybe I've lost her. Lost my ability to right-click. Let's just go back. There we go. Okay, so for Susan, I'm going to right-click on her. It brings up a menu again where I'm looking at Susan, and now that I've updated her detail information, I'd like to go look at the details behind this position. There is a lot of data that we brought in from HCM that's populating everything for this particular employee. You can imagine from a planning perspective the reporting capability behind this kind of data. I can see Susan, the type of employee she is, her appointment, the pay type. These were all attributes that we worked with a compensation design focus group to say, what will be helpful for you when you're planning your employee and position population? What's going to be helpful for you in a reporting perspective? Are you going to be able to see all of your blank assistant 3 title codes? Are you going to be, so we'll have reports to support that. But for now, when I'm looking at one employee, one position, I can get all the details in this particular screen format. So I can look at the profile for the employee as well as details on their pay. You can see Susan's had a lot of pay changes. In the last year, she must be a commonly selected person for pay changes, and I feel really bad that I've decreased her salary so significantly. And these are all not real. They may be real employees on our campus, but all the salary data scrambled. So we're not looking at anything that's confidential here. I can also look at any other earnings that Susan may have had. Let's say, for example, someone entered manually a stipend, and in this case they have. They said Susan has a $1,000 stipend. I can see her FTE, her employee status. You can put an employee on a leave of absence with or without pay, so you can plan for sabbaticals. You can separate an employee in order to plan for a significant impact on your budget. And then I can also see what her salary will look like by period and her distributions or chart strings. And this is where, as Cathy pointed out earlier, the distributions can change, but they should add up to 100%. And the outcome of that, I'm going to right-click one more time and navigate to view my employee expense. The outcome of all of that information is calculating. This is a year total reg salary. Now, her salary has been changing, so this is actually the culmination of all those changes within the year total here. Behind the scenes, when I was clicking that launch button, our users, when they make any sort of an adjustment, multiple calculations are happening, and some of them include fringe automatically being populated into the correct account at the correct rate. So fringe benefits rates calculating on the employee, that's not something our planners are doing. Their net vacation, if there's any vacation, a vacation expenditure planned, that will happen automatically and charged to the correct account, as well as GAIL, which is an employee limited liability insurance. The correct amount is populating to the correct compensation account. So these are things that our users are not having to specifically plan for. Based on the employee information that we brought in from human capital management, these calculations are running now in the background for them. They're not having to populate what their fringe benefit rate is specifically for this population. So this gives me my total compensation expense. I now know the total planned dollar amount for this employee, including benefits for the entire year. If I wanted to see what the breakdown of that was by month, by distribution, this is the information that we export from human capital planning into our planning tool. I can see their reg salary by distribution. I can see the fringe by distribution, their vacation, if there is any, there's $0, and then that GAIL. So I'm done playing maybe around with all of my human capital planning, all of my employee and position planning. The next thing I can do is move right into plan. Let's say now I know I need to plan for some other expense. I need to plan for some general supplies or some communication expense. I don't have to leave. I can go somewhere else. I just click into my other task list. This task list we built to support both the forecasting and the operating budget process that we just went through. Users starting in February, I believe, around that time frame, were building out their FY13 forecast. So they were forecasting through to the end of the year. And then we took that data and we copied it into an operating budget for the next year. So then they began planning their operating budget for fiscal year 14. So considering that I'm working on my fiscal year 14 operating budget, I could click on the task that says operating budget. Within this task, there's a reminder. Are your preferences set correctly? Do you need to change them? My preferences are set the way I want. We categorize data, and this is really up to your process. I would say build your task list to enhance or support the business process best. When we went live with the first round, we did a generic task list that has significantly changed as we've continued to enhance this process. Now we have this prepare section where we're saying, we think these are the reports that are going to best support you in preparing your operating budget. So right from my task list, I can run reports. I can enter all that other data I had mentioned before. I'm going to click on entering data in a form and then make this a little wider again. So entering data in a form, one of the things I'm going to talk about regarding best practices is usability of forms. And something that you can consider around creating data forms is rather than having one massive form that people have to navigate through, you can break it out into multi-tabbed forms. So we went with the option of having a form where a user comes in and they can see a summarized perspective of their budget, and then we broke it out by account type. So now go enter your budget for your revenue. You can do it for your non-comp expense. You can view it for your compensation expense, but you can't make any updates there. That's all happening in HCP by employee and position. And then you can also plan for transfers and changes in fund balance. At the top of the page here, these are drop-down lists. And whatever is available in my entity selection is based upon my user access. We have security around our entities. I only have one here because that was the one I entered in my preferences. But if I want to enter data, this is again that concept of the intersection. If I want to enter data and have it flow through my hierarchy, I have to choose members that are at the bottom of my intersection. So let's say, for example, I want to plan for a fund. I can't plan at, I'm not planning at all funds. I'm planning at my unrestricted plan fund. That way, when I summarize all my funds together, I can see a total of all the ones that were down in the lower part of the hierarchy. So I'm going to choose, let's choose 19900, one of our favorites. And then for chart field 1, which is our project code, most of our users are not planning out to that level of detail. So what we have, some do though. So what we have is the option to do that if you like, or most people are using a plan value, chart 1 summary plan. I click go. This is now going to change the totals. So Laurent was saying one of the things we were trying to move towards is this ability to see my actuals versus my operating budget. And on this summary tab in the form, I get a complete picture of this particular data intersection. I can see the beginning balances as all the way down through the hierarchy into the ending balance. And then identify, oh, this is a little off in non-compensation. So I can then go to the non-compensation form. Anything that's grayed out is not data enterable. Fee remission here is not data enterable. That's one of our calculations that happens in our system automatically. When you plan for a fee remission eligible position, that will populate for you. So I don't have to actually enter data there. If I go down here though, I want to show you one of these accounts. I just want to verify this account, keep this in mind because we're going to look at it a couple times. Communications plan, I just want to verify there's $20,000 in that intersection. I'll show that number a few more times. But let's say I'm looking at my transportation plan and it's for $60,000 expense, and I realize it actually should be $50,000 this year. All I have to do is click into the cell. You'll see I get comments about where I am. I'm on a particular row in a particular account, and this certain, so it gives me information on my intersection, and I'll change this to 50. Once I click out of the cell, it highlights yellow to indicate that something has changed and you need to save it. So this is an action that we can't incorporate into the update. You know, when I was saying before, our users, rather than having them in HCP, instead of having them save and then click a business rule, we're not doing that here. We're having them save, or we're not able to have them save just when they click out of the cell. So they have to go up to this icon, click save, and then they'll get a reminder the data has been saved. So one of the things about Cal Plan is if I wanted to see this flow through all the way to our reporting cube, I'd have to wait until our data push occurs. So that's the one thing we have to remind people is that we've gotten calls, you know, I entered it and I don't see it on my report. Well, there's a data push that has to occur between our reporting applications. We have that set, we've played with the times. We had it set to an hourly push. And we've had it flow at different times during the day, and that's something, if you choose to go this route, that you'll have to think of your best practice for your business process. How often do you want to see data in your reporting cube from your planning application? And the reason you'll have to weigh that out is while that push is happening, it can slow things down a little bit. Not very, you know, sometimes it's not noticeable, but at the end of your budget cycle, when everyone's having to submit their data all at the same time, you might notice a little performance. lack there. Okay, so this is planning in CalPlan. So now let's say I want to see a report. I can run specific reports right from the task list, or I can go to a report repository. We created the folder structure for our reports and named our reports report folders specifically after the application they're running out of. We have some reports that are coming right out of CalPlan, and then more robust reporting that's available out of our reporting application, Cal Reporting. And one of our favorite reports to run is our SHRECNA. We've been talking about that quite a bit. So I will run one. Let's see, I'll do one that's drillable. When I want to run a report, I get something called a point of view, and that's really just the criteria by which you want to run the report. The last time I was in this, or I was in this report, it remembers what I chose to run it by. So you can see I chose to run it on year total, fiscal year 14, operating budget, working, total chart 1 for this particular entity. But if I wanted to change something, I could type it directly in to a cell, or I could go find it. So I have my entity 117817 there. And let's say I don't know where that is in my entity hierarchy. I can search for it. Oops. It will locate it for me and then also find it within the hierarchy. This is really helpful right now as we've restructured our hierarchy so much that our users are now kind of having to reconsider where their entities are located. But I will say that having this rationalized hierarchy has made reporting so amazing. I can now, that number that I was looking at for a particular account, I can run that for any DEPT ID and see what that value is for a particular account or across campus. So I'm going to run this report. Let's just say I'll go up 2 levels. We'll see the total combination for a couple of their departments. This report is run in thousands. This is the statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in net assets. And on the left-hand side, I was saying that it was drillable, and the importance of, or the value, I should say, of reviewing your hierarchies is because I can now drill in. This is dynamically calculated hierarchy. I'm drilling into my hierarchy. So I looked at my total for my operating transfers, and then I drill into my campus support, and I'm getting information within my hierarchy. I can drill back out and pull it back out. I can go, let's go into my total non-compensation and my supplies and material, no, other operating expenses. And here I can drill into any number of different accounts. There's my miscellaneous expenses. You'll see there's a 2 listed there. This is in thousands, so now I'm getting down to $2,000, which might not be very helpful for me to be thinking of in that level of detail. Supplies, materials, and equipment. I can be looking at my supplies. So you can drill in and drill out, and this is not hard-coded into the report. Once you've drilled into a report, you could create a PDF. You could send it with the drilled in and the drilled out version. I can drill in and drill out of my funds here as well, so really helpful to be thinking of your hierarchies that way when you start drilling into them and drilling out of them from a reporting perspective. So any questions on reporting, planning? I'm going to show one. I've got 2 more minutes to make up. And I'm going to show a quick demo of SmartView as well. But before I do that, I just want to make sure there's no questions on the actual application here. Yes?
Real quick, when you made that change from 16,000 to 50,000,
yes. Yes. Cell comments. You can right-click and add a cell comment. The caveat with cell comments are if you want someone else to see them, they have to know what intersection you put them in. So if I'm looking at that particular intersection, I can see a cell highlighted, and it will have a comment attached next to it. But let's say you're working with your partners, and they're looking for your data, and you might want to share information. They would have to know to go to that particular fund account, chart field 1 that I chose, to then see your cell comments. So that's the only I would say that's the hardship of working with them, but there's a great benefit as well. Any others? Yes?
Are you going to show a variance report?
I am going to show variance. I'll do that right now, Barbara. Let's take a look at the Shrekna 3-year scenario comparison. This is actually a report that the budget office requested, and I'll just click OK. So here it is. This is my actuals from FY12 compared to my forecast from FY13 with variance. I can then take a look at that and compare it to my operating budget for fiscal year 14, and I see my variance. So I can see what actually occurred compared to what I was planning for multiple years, or I could just take a look at, I could take a look at my operating budget, different snapshots of it. I could say, you know, I have this one initial version that was loaded, and then I changed it a bunch. And now I have a working version of my operating budget. What's the variance? So not just actuals compared to one of your plans and see variance, but within the actual same scenario, you can be doing variance analysis as well. This was what we tried to accomplish when we first went live with reporting and realized we're going to need some help from John. We're going to need someone to help us out here. So it's not just always in setting up the tool, as we've seen today. Okay, so I'm going to move away from the web and just go to Excel. So I'm opening up Excel, and I already have, this is a template created, but I'm going to go to a blank sheet first to show you how I started this template. So from Excel, and click on this tab. I have SmartView installed, and the reason I know I have it installed is I have what we call a SmartView ribbon at the top of my page. I select my panel, and that allows me, I'm now logging in I'm using Excel and logging in with a direct connection to our database. So you can think of the power of this tool. If you have Excel spreadsheets that you turn in or you utilize, or you're just really Excel savvy, that you can take it and refresh it with a connection to the database, and the numbers change for you. It takes a lot of learning. There's a big learning curve because you have to learn how to create the report in Excel utilizing those new dimensions. But once you get going, it's a really great tool. So I just signed into Cal Planning. I'm selecting my connection. I can choose to connect to Essbase or Hyperion Planning or the Reporting and Analysis Framework, where I'm going to connect to Essbase. And then, I actually logged in as myself, so I'm seeing all kinds of available applications to run reports from. But I'm just going to select Cal Reporting, which is our reporting application, and select Ad Hoc Analysis. When I do that, and I'm going to close this panel. When I do that, it sets an ad hoc grid with a live connection to the Cal Reporting database. I can choose to either type directly into these Excel fields and start creating a report from here, or this is all personal preference. I like to have what I call a point of view. I like to take some of those pieces of data and move them off the page a little bit so that I can be in control of creating the report. So from here, I can type directly into a field. I'm typing FY14, operating budget, working, or I can drill in the same way I showed you on the reports. I can drill in and find a member, and then I can start setting up my report. I can pull things into Excel and start creating a more dynamic look and feel. And rather than taking the whole time to do that, I'm just going to show you what I did here. And I just want to make sure I'm connected in this. And so here I have something that I already set up for 17817. That was the entity I was working in CalPlan. I have my account here, total non-compensation, and I'm looking at actuals versus forecasts versus operating budget. I can drill into my account. So I just double-clicked on non-compensation, and I'm drilling into my accounts. And let's say I go to my other operating expenses, and from within my other operating expenses, well, I don't remember where it's located, so I'm going to do something where I'm going to say, keep this only. I don't know where that one account is located. I'm going to type directly into the cell. Let's see if I typed it correctly. Oh, I didn't. So I'm going to undo. And then I'm going to undo again. And now I'm back to where I was. Undo one more time. Somewhere within here, located, is my communications account within my hierarchy. So this is one of the caveats of utilizing this, is that you have to be able to now find where everything is within the hierarchy. I promise you I'll find it for you. Within here then, I can make changes, I can refresh. I can take things on the page and remove them. Let's say, for example, I have my entity listed on the page, and I can pivot this out of the actual ad hoc grid and pivot it back to, let's say I want that off the page. So now I'm just looking at my accounts. I can also take Excel functionality. If I'm looking at this and I just want to make this into an accounting terminology, or I could insert some sort of an Excel formula at the bottom. And now I can add totals in here. So there's a lot of flexibility. You can play around with it quite a bit, but it's going to take time for users to assimilate SmartView. I was just having a conversation about that at the breakout. What do you think? Should we do SmartView now or later? And that's something I'm going to talk about now. If I go back to our slides, okay, so we saw a lot about the application, and I said just scratching the surface, very, very, very lightly touching on HCP, on CalPlan, and on Cal reporting. And some things to think about as you're looking at this. And again, these are some best practices, and maybe that worked for us. Some of these are best practices just in general design, but some are things that worked for us here at Berkeley and might not necessarily be something that you choose to go with at your institution. But with some of the user interface best practices that we've thought of are dimensions. And like I said, allot time to plan them. Plan them strategically, think them through. Users on our campus wanted to plan to every possible fund that they had, 25,000 funds. And they wanted them all. And we got a lot of pushback that they weren't going to all be available in the planning tool when we went live originally. And now, after a couple of phases, we're getting feedback that they'd actually like less. You know, people are saying, I wish I had thought of this a little bit more. I wish I hadn't planned to all those funds. Now that they're actually thinking more strategically about their budget, now that they've been in the tool, it would be nice if I hadn't planned, that $10,000 to the one fund, and I had summarized that and planned my unrestricted for $200,000, whatever the summary is. So that's a big key, and I would say one that has been very relieving to hear the people that we're working with also feeling the same thing, that maybe I shouldn't be planning to that level of detail. Task lists. Work with your business partners to enhance your task list. I would say the task list shouldn't just be how to get something tool-focused done. It's really how do you take your business process, your budget process, and make it applicable within the tool. So, we learned that along the way as well. Linking to our reference materials, going to the budget office and saying, Laurent, which reports are you going to require during this budget process? They're actually in that task list, so that rather than going to another website and finding the requirements for the budget submission this year, they did it right from the task list. They were able to look at the requirements, put the reports that were necessary, even the narrative that was required was all contained within that task list. Simplify. So when you're thinking of creating a form, rows and columns are going to contain there's dense and sparse dimensions, and if you have questions about what that means, get someone that's familiar with Hyperion to help you work through how to best set up your dimensions within rows and forms and within reports and forms. It'll be very helpful when someone opens a form for it not to take a very long time to process. We put our sparse dimensions in our page when we were creating our forms. And then we also, as I said, we split forms that were quite large into into multiple tabs. That way, there's a bit more streamlined interface of rather than having to work through a very large form, I can go directly to the account category that I'm looking for. Business rules. So business rules are the calculations that launch or are launching in the background. And this was a really great one for us. It was a huge win to have some of them run on save. And that saved our users multiple clicks per every time they're in the application. And if you're using this tool, you know clicks become your next best friend. You're clicking here to update this, you're clicking. So if you can save that, if you can streamline that interface, I highly recommend it. The other thing it did is rather than them running a business rule that was calculating against many intersections, the business rule was calculating just on that one intersection for the data that they were updating. So we're saving a lot of time there as well. And then Smart View. Smart View, like I showed you, I got a little lost trying to find my one account because I was typing it in incorrectly, but I'm in a rush for time, so I didn't go back and work my way through it. But with Smart View, it's an amazing tool. It's very powerful. It has the ability to submit data back to the database. I could create that spreadsheet or that one report I started and then take it and set it up in a way to take data and submit it back to your planning application. It takes a lot of setup up front to get that to happen. But I will also say there is no undo on saving in this application. So if I click save and I blow away all the data for my entire division and I don't have some sort of a backup to help me, it's gone. I've now lost all the data for my entire division. So it's a decision you have to make about whether or not you would provide the capability for your users to submit data from SmartView into your planning application in a mass method. On our campus, we chose not to release that right now. A few users on our campus have it. The budget office utilizes it when they're planning their central commitments, but not much else. Tread lightly when you're thinking about that decision. And if you have questions about exactly why we chose not to do it, feel free to touch base with us a little more on that. Some lessons learned in our implementation. 11.1.2.2, that new version, had some bugs that we didn't identify until we had major load on our application. Reports were coming up with this weird error when we were in our user acceptance testing, and we had been doing unit testing and interface testing, and we had all this testing under our belts, and we got into UAT and we went, what is that? What is that? Why are you doing that? And so there was a bug, and that happens. You prepare for it. We logged in Oracle SR. Cathy has very good friends. You develop relations with Oracle, and we released a patch that has fixed that now. Or we implemented a patch, or we are implementing a patch. I think it's in our QA environment in dev, right? So we are implementing a patch that will fix that. Financial reporting we're having issues with the position employee intersections in block storage, and our partners that we've talked to that are trying to report on this are as well. So other universities, they've contacted me and said, did you ever get the reports to run on all of your employees and positions for your entire campus? Right now the answer is no, so we're working towards that, and we'll continue to work on that, and if you have information, we can keep you posted on our progress on that as we go forward. And then implementation lesson learned for this new version as well was to prep our users a little bit about the navigation. I mentioned clicking. There's clicking involved. You can use your keyboard to navigate through the workspace, but most of it involves clicking. You'd have to be a very savvy keyboard user. So in the new version of the software, you have to double click in a cell to do data entry, and we prepped our users for that in advance. And so if you can do that in advance, I would suggest it as well.
We also negotiated firmly with Gore to fix it.
Yeah. Did you hear that? Cathy said we also negotiated firmly with Oracle to fix that. From a change management perspective, implementations lesson learned, double your training, double your help desk, and double your change management expectations. As we found, this wasn't just for our purposes. this wasn't just a tool implementation. This was an implementation on how to do something that wasn't currently being done across the entire campus. So there was a big, big change component that was necessary in order to help this be successful. And I would say that we realized very quickly that the people on our campus were our partners. The local implementation managers that we mentioned were critical in the design of the application, as well as in getting getting the message of the tool, the process, the changes from within their division out more broadly across the campus. We stood in front of rooms. I came from UC Santa Cruz thinking I was part of the larger community, and I was talking in a language that would be well consumed, and realized if you're in a different division, sometimes it doesn't always translate across the campus when you have such a big business like Berkeley or like your institutions. And so having people from their own organizations talking about this was very helpful and was key in partnering with them along the way. And then for us, because of the magnitude of the change, not just being a tool implementation, but also changes to our org hierarchy and our processes and all the strategic enhancements that were made, a phased implementation is and continues to be very helpful. And so, we have users that have come on board just recently and are consuming all of this at once, but we can see that the change has been a little bit easier for those that have started with us from phase 1 and are working through this over the last year or so. So I think that kind of wraps it up. A couple of things just specific to the public sector planning and budget are listed here for you. If you're thinking about potentially utilizing public sector planning and budgeting, it has a lot of stuff out of the box that is amazing, already developed for you forms, already developed for you reports. We took them and we updated them a little bit just to make them streamlined for our processes, but we utilized their business rules. I mean, it's amazing what's already built for you with that tool. We consolidated the employee and position forms, and we reordered some menus. So here's some things that are very specific to what we did when we got the package that was offered with the public sector planning and budgeting, for which we call HCP on our campus. But if you have any specific questions, Andy Zirman, our functional lead, myself, Mehmet, Alfred will be around today, as well as we have tables tomorrow available if you have specific questions. I just did a very general overview, but we can get really specific about our architecture and our data flows if that would be helpful to you. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, we just wanted to give you a little insight to some of our directions where we still need to go. So one of them, it's very helpful. We get asked a lot, where are you going? What does the future look like? And so behind the scenes, we started to build a maturity model. So how is this organization going to mature? And there's a key aspect to this at the top, which we built into the maturity model. It wasn't just over time, but it was, how do you make a transition? How do you make a change? And so to remind ourselves that at first you need to just build awareness and desire, that you can't just jump on and have people doing new skills and taking action. You really need to build the awareness and desire first. And to remind ourselves that that takes a lot longer to do than you actually think. So in this, the old Berkeley, we really started very incremental and transactional. We lacked many of these tools, and our approach to finance was rather on the reactive side. We also, as you've heard a lot about, the perm and temp environment. I love how Erin likes to say it's really the mind control of the perm and temp environment, which is...
The perm bud's mind control.
And we really weren't doing a lot of performance reviewing. And so we looked at these dimensions and said, well, how should these start to mature over time? There's a lot more complex version of this maturity model behind the scenes, but no one lets me put it up on a slide.
That is great.
I'm lucky I get to put this up, never mind. But this is a simplified version, and we continue to say, what is the future state? What is it going to look like? And what are the optimized trade-offs? We're moving to this solution-driven world fully integrating systems. So we didn't even get into the beginning, scratching the surface of this full integration. Pam Brown's here, who runs the Cal Answers section, which is, we really want to get to combining financial and non-financial data to really do the performance review and to really think about these things. These systems really need to interact, and so behind the scenes we're having these conversations so we can get metrics out there, we can get profiles of units, we can really have decision making influence our strategy that we talked about later. We aren't just talking about strategy from a high level, oh, let's come up with great ideas. We're really trying to build a very intricate strategic metrics built kind of way forward.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a teeny bit to this, I would say, early on in the project, as John said, we would meet with deans and they would be like, why are you here? Why would we talk to you? Why would we want to change? We really like the environment that we're in now just fine. And I know everything about all my numbers right now, whether that was true or not. And we've really hit a point where we pushed the boulder up the hill and we got to the top of the hill, and now it's rolling away from us down the other side of the hill. And campus is super eager for more. They're like, well, how come you guys haven't done more faster? And when are we going to start really making changes to all of our perm budge allocations? And we want to talk about RCM and a new revenue model and how money follows students, and how we'll make trade-offs between staff and academic positions. And everyone now is super eager for more and more and more. And so it's really interesting. At first it was like, boy, are we ever going to get to the future state? And at this point, it's how do we make sure that we're thoughtful in getting all the way there, keeping things going.
And it takes, with the team, we spend a lot of time really talking about these arrows. How do you break these arrows down into the different years? How do you break these arrows down into the different projects? And really seeing that across these projects, a lot of offices and a lot of technology owns these arrows. It's not like one project's doing one dimension. We really have to kind of partner together. And so we spend a lot of time really trying to figure out, well, how do you move from incremental to optimized trade-offs and really make it stick? So that's a huge factor. We've talked a lot about the matrix chart of accounts. You've learned why we do that. And again, we're trying to get to full performance management, because that's what matters at the end of the day. If you're not performing, why did we do this? And if we're not helping you perform better, why did we do this? Because again, we have to have a fabulous organization, and that's what we're driving for. We're here for the kids, we're here for the research, we're here for the public service, and if we don't change that, it's all for naught. So again, we have to be honest with this and start doing it, which is new for higher ed. Again, more complicated is just to give you a sense. This is the behind the scenes. We do a lot of testing on the org capabilities, and we did a lot of testing across different dimensions. So we talked to divisional chief financial officers, we talked to our financial analysts, we talked to managers and administrators, and we kind of tested and said, what skills, what are these org capabilities should we be focusing on next? Because clearly we can't do all of them together. And so this helped us kind of narrow down this overwhelming list and be very specific. And so, we just decided to focus on these three main areas that in conversation, what we need to focus on now to get us through the next section or the particular arrow that you just saw is to focus on the tools and technology. So the data's there now. Can you pull it? Can you look at it? Can you use it? Can you manipulate it? It's not as easy as you think to kind of build that in. It's not the tool's fault. It's like, how do we do financial analysis and really do it well? Everyone needs to know VLOOKUP on this campus, so we can be very precise. It's not just to know Excel. I need you to do VLOOKUP in Excel, and here's why, and I'll show you why and go in depth. The strategic financial analysis and forecasting. So you need to know why we're doing a forecasting, why we're doing an operating budget, what does strategic financial analysis look like? And then finally, the way we work in learning and performance. So we need to figure out how to work better together and more intently and more precisely and more action-oriented. And so we spend a lot of time around this and trying to define for people, what does innovation look like? How can you see it? How can you measure it? So that we can start to see pockets of it, and how can we share that across campus so you can jump on board. The biggest thing we try to do is there is innovation out there. There is brilliance out there. There's great skills. What happens is we don't get access to them. We don't get to hear about it. We don't get to talk with each other as colleagues enough to capture what we already know on campus and push it out further. We could all be great if we actually talked. to each other more. And so these are the three areas that we've pulled and are working on kind of as next steps. And we're always looking, well, how do we do it? Do we do it just in time? Do we do longer workshops? How do you get this information out? And that's kind of always where we're pushing for.
Well, and I do think that that's the thing that's, I think, different about this effort than some other campus change or systems projects that we've worked on historically in my time here is, we were audacious enough in this project to really want it to work for the departments and folks lower down in the organizational hierarchy and work for them on a day-to-day basis. And at the same time want that data to flow and be structured in the right way so that it would work for the divisions and so that the divisions' work would work for us in Central Campus. Because there's only so much we can do from the central office on campus. We're doing that, and I think we're doing good work, and we'll continue to get better at it. And we'll run Berkeley the best we can, as you guys will your own campuses. But I think the thing that's really going to make a difference and the thing that could really change the game is if all the other schools and colleges and the smaller units out on campus also were all very successful. And so to get there, we really need a partnership, and that partnership, I think, opens doors and other possibilities that otherwise we just really couldn't get to. And so I think some of what you've heard today is just sort of the way we structure this project to try and get everyone in, have it work for everyone. And we've been imperfectly successful at that, but we're keeping on fighting the good fight on that.
And I'd like to bring Erin back up.
So I'm so grateful for everyone who came up here today to hear our stories and to contribute at the lunchtime conversations. What I'd like to acknowledge is both the people you've seen up here today, the people in the room. Berkeley is blessed to have an amazing team working on this. And someone commented at one of the lunchtimes, and I really believe this, we really pulled it up to the top level every day in terms of we're changing the world, we're rethinking how we do this, and it's hard, right? You've just seen so much data that's hard to absorb, and it's really hard when you're in the middle of people trying to think through how position works and that crazy chart that showed all the pieces, and you're like, but what happens if you add a 17th chart string? And everyone goes, oh my God, right? But we know that's the reality. And so for us, it's been very energizing to continue to bring it up to this provides a better experience for our core mission. And it also helps us, a couple of people asked about funding, and we've been really fortunate that our provost has been a huge supporter. And our provost stood up at our finance summit, which really is exactly what it sounds. It's everyone on campus that touches finance gets in a room, and we've done it twice. And he talked about that he'd been on campus for 40 years and how grateful he was for every single person in the room who he knew had been working really hard to change the whole mindset of the finance. And the power of that was huge. So I'll just acknowledge that we've been really lucky. And I would say that even if you don't have all of those pieces, it's just how do you keep putting the pieces together, and how do you find a few people on the academic side who aren't in finance to sponsor you and sit in those conversations, because it helps bring it up to the top goal and helps everyone get behind. Because I'll say that if you just randomly ask someone, oh, don't you want to change your whole hierarchy and clean up CF2? They're like, God, no. So, it helps. So this just shows one of the slides that we use in all of our messaging, not just about this type of forum, but this is for almost everything on campus. And so we talked a little bit early on about the OE effort, which for us is our how do you control expenses and do business processes. And so that's that first column there. Now we've been working on campus and trying to do an infrastructure for people to grow revenues. And as I was listening here today and thinking about what's important about this one is that if you couldn't see revenue in our old system, that would be impossible. So it took today to remind me that the strategic thing we're having with every unit on campus to grow their revenues and be more dynamic, this has been a real enabler to get that strategic goal accomplished. And then finally, and this is what today has been about, is how do you do the resource allocation? So to put in perspective, our controlling expenses target is about 75 million of annual budget, and we're at about 55, 60 million now. The growing revenues, our target estimate is 50 million. So important, both together 125 million. That represents a large portion of the the cuts that we've received and some of the changes. But when you think about the resource allocation, again, that's $2.2 billion, right? So that has a lot of juice in it if we can figure out how to make those trade-offs and then to translate those trade-offs into impact for the students, faculty, and public service. This is why I was over here. So this just talks about the flexibility, right? And on this revenue source, all I'm trying to show is that in our current environment, 72% of it's kind of outside of our control. And I don't mean that in a victim mentality or, oh, what are we going to do? But if you don't reallocate within that, the governor has been very firm and strong on his position on tuition and fees. We have a roadmap for some of the state funding, but as we all know, we have huge needs on campus: deferred maintenance, IT infrastructure, student services, additional things for the faculty, salary pressure in the unrepresented workforce, right? We've got all of this stuff that has huge pressure, and 72% of the revenue we get in are pretty constrained in terms of our way to grow it. And so putting that pressure on what you show here for us, which is other, which is hard to manage, the other, and then the gifts and investments, that's hard. So that's why this is really important as well, and how do you manufacture that flexibility? The next thing that we've touched on a lot in that last piece is how do you keep enhancing your organizational capacity? And that's both clarifying roles, thinking about skills, but it's also how do you get that culture of we're all in it together, we're going to break across silos and figure out how to solve it, and we're not going to think very narrowly. And then finally, for us at Berkeley, this common infrastructure has been really empowering. And it's empowering both in terms of making the decision information available, but I think it's also empowering because as we're asking people to think differently about stuff, we're saying to them very honestly, you are not an island. So if we make you solve how you think about curriculum and how you think about your budget and how are you going to worry about your wait list by yourself, it's really isolating, and that has all these negative connotations because we're all here for the same organization and the same culture. So I would say there are additional benefits. I know that IT common infrastructure is expensive, but the benefit is more than just the tool. It's having people not feel isolated and that they don't have anyone to help them. And I would just iterate that across all of our projects. So as we've talked about, the future still has lots of work to do. We're still working towards sort of this bottoms-up budget process. We have a lot of pieces in place. We are going to actively engage more with our deans in the fall in terms of what they need. So they've had a test of this. They have some sense of what they need in terms of being an informed dean, but we know we're not meeting all of their needs yet, and we know that even in the question framework you heard earlier with John Bain-Chekal was talking about, that how that translates into how they see the information and how they interact with their staff, we still have bridging to do there. We are continuing to work with the Academic Senate to make sure that we're both meeting the organizational structures needs, but also the broad faculty needs. And so we're doing some tools specifically for the faculty, building on some of the data cleanup, which will make their lives easier. And so we're really, really excited about this. And I thank you all for engaging in that today. Before we wrap up and take some questions, I do want to thank our sponsors who are also our consultants. And I used to be a consultant a bit in a former life, and I've hired them and I've worked with people, but I'll say this. Starting with M2, who was the first on board, UCLA actually recommended them to us. They had helped them with their Hyperion go live, and they were with us in the early days when it was M2, Cathy, the tool in the box, and not a lot of information. And they really stuck with us in terms of the fact that, as you can kind of tell, I was pushing Cathy, can't we do this in 16 weeks? And she's like, you're insane, but I like that. And so trying to map out what this would mean. We then brought on Huron, and we have a number of those folks here. And again, it was how do you problem solve, right? Because this is really doing things in real time. You've got to be flexible. And as you think about it, there's lots of blind spots for all of us, right? And having the partner And Huron would sometimes come and be like, I know you're not worried about this, but I think there's a train coming. And then you'd go home at night and you'd be like, they're totally right. How do we fix it, right? But having that piece and not have everyone constantly come to you, well, I've been hired to do this. Because you've got 5 blind spots you haven't seen, and having lots of smart people in the room helps. And then finally, the Santos group, which really for us helped us understood what we would know if we had gone through this before, right? And we really had a number of people playing significant roles. And the been through this before had nothing to do with the tech, actually, or some of the business process change, but really the mindset shift. And so I would also just say that for me, personally, in my seat, having 3 partners, if you had asked me before I got here, I'd say, oh my God, that'd be impossible to manage. But in reality, it had people focus on different components. And when you're moving so fast, that really helped. So with that, I think we will take a few questions and then go over to Free House. Are there any questions that people have while we're all together?
We're actually pretty early, so we can
Okay.
stay here. We can do whatever we want. We can turn music on and dance. But we can answer more questions here, or if people would like to continue the discussions that were very subject specific at the different tables, we can also do that. So
Or we could go do that with beer. It's up to you. Yeah, I got some beer votes. Any questions, though, while we're still here before we turn it off? All right. Great. Well, thanks, everyone. I say we head over to Free House and have a drink.